We have we have time for questions and comments. I'd just like to start off by saying, on behalf of WOLA, first of all, thanks to all of you for this program. Second, because WOLA does advocacy, I really appreciate Kate ending with recommendations about action rather than just analysis. And third, on behalf of WOLA, I'd say we're always happy to conspire about access to information. So let's talk later about that. So, comments or questions?
Mike, what does the court do in terms of monitoring compliance with these rulings? Brazil is presenting a relatorio to the court. In fact, I think it's arrived yesterday on the first anniversary of the ruling, which was yesterday, and we're all waiting to see Brazil's argument about its compliance with this. They're going to focus on presumably the indemnification side of the ruling and the information side of the ruling, likely to highlight the Truth Commission establishment and the clause in the FOIA law, perhaps. It's hard to know what they'll come to you with, and they'll, the whole issue of the amnesty will be set aside. But where does the issue lie with the court in terms of follow-up when the state doesn't comply?
Thanks. There's a compliance process. The case stays open until full compliance is achieved, and I think that's only happened in maybe 10 or 15% of the cases the court's decided now. That's probably that probably gives an unnecessarily or an excessively pessimistic view of compliance. A lot of times, these are complicated cases to fully comply with, but the point is most of the cases stay open and there is a compliance supervision process. That process basically consists of two things. On the one hand, periodic information from the parties to the court about what has been done. So every few months, the state on the one hand and the representatives of the victims as well as the commission on the other hand will send information to the court about what has happened in terms of compliance. This is generally done in writing, although every couple of years or so in each case there will be a compliance hearing. That's a closed-door hearing that takes place in Costa Rica in which the judges, it's usually a panel of judges, sits down with the parties, and for a few hours they discuss outstanding issues in terms of compliance and try to deal with any sort of roadblocks or practical issues that can be resolved and apply some political pressure on the state to continue compliant. It hasn't done so. The other major thing that happens is there are actually resolutions that are issued by the court periodically. Usually these are sort of every year or two, oftentimes after a compliance hearing. So you can actually go on the court's website, and for each of the judgments that have been around for a while, you can usually find at least one resolution from the court in which they go reparation measure by reparation measure and talk about the information that's been provided by the parties and reach findings regarding whether or not the reparation that was ordered, the particular measure of reparation, has been complied with. Those are the mechanisms that the court has. There is sort of a nuclear option that's contemplated in the American Convention on Human Rights, which is that the court raise the issue at the General Assembly of the OAS. The idea being that the states themselves will then sort of take possession of the issue and apply, at a minimum, political pressure and eventually, potentially some form of sanctions against states that have failed to comply. This has been rarely invoked. I think it's been invoked once or twice. It's been it's pretty much blown up in the court's face. The times that it has been tried, I don't expect the court to try it anytime soon, given the not very positive precedent that exists. So there's a process. It allows, I think, for a fairly active intervention by the court to supervise compliance, but at the end of the day, if the state has decided that it's not going to overturn its amnesty law, there's no inter-American army that's going to roll in and force the state to comply. So that's the sort of.
And just quickly, can you elaborate just for a second on the resolution side of it? Because that's the only part that you've mentioned where it sounds like the court might actually say something publicly.
Yeah.
but we wouldn't hear, we wouldn't have a resolution phase for Brazil until when and
That's a little hard to predict. I mean, again, a rough ballpark is, after a couple of years, you might get your first resolution. It really depends on the case. In some cases, seems to be a resolution every year or so. In other cases, 5 years go by and there's nothing. It's a little bit unpredictable. I think the court's trying to be a little bit more systematic about the order in which it does these things, but it's not. I couldn't give you a clear answer, but you're right in the sense that the only public official expression of the court's stance on whether Brazil has complied in this case will be when there is a resolution on compliance.
Let's let Paulo kind of.
Not just one thing, Peter, check on the date of this information that was sent to either the commission or the court, because I checked, and I checked this afternoon to people in appropriate places, and the last communication is from April. May have been, someone may have paid attention to this right now, but the last communication I've been told is from April. I don't think that the executive in Brazil, and I checked with the Supreme Court in Brazil, and what I was told is that the executive power in Brazil has no authority to act, zero, because they don't have jurisdiction of this. This is covered by the amnesty law, and this comes from, Jobim said that. Jobim is a former Minister of Justice, President of the Supreme Court, Professor of Constitutional Law, Minister of Defense, who nominated as his advisor, political advisor, one of the former guerrillas from the Araguaia, who remains with Celso Amorim as advisor, which is José Genuíno. José Genuíno is a former member of the guerrilla in Araguaia, member of the PT. And so I think that we are in a sort of limbo kind of situation, because I think you will not see from Brazil a reaction, a communication, because simply it's not with us. The reaction that I get from Brazil is say, oh, it is. Sorry. It doesn't refer to us, because this is governed by something called the law of amnesty. It does not apply.
Yeah, you're next.
I'm also interested in the implementation of the Araguaia sentence, and obviously political will comes into it, but I was also interested in something that Pablo said, and he said, 25% of population doesn't, no, 25%, only 25% of the population knows what the OAS is. They probably never even heard of the sentence anyway. So I'm just wondering, how much do you think that Brazilian society has to play in the implementation of the sentence, and what can we do to sway Brazilian society, I don't know, through media work or...
You can continue to do your work, but this is going to be internalized only if political leaders in Brazil. And what is fascinating about this, all the political leaders in Brazil in the last, let's start with Cardoso. All of these people are defenders of human rights in the frame that you believe in human rights. There is no, Dilma is not just say, oh, those human rights people. No, she was tortured. She believes in process. Cardoso is the same. Lula is the exact same. I think it will take action in Brazil. I don't know what internationally can be done. Will people be, because the human rights, the court will say something publicly that Brazil will feel, what society in Brazil will feel embarrassed about, will feel, some may. It's possible, some may. It depends on the context. And therefore, I think that that's why I told, if the Truth Commission produces a very good report, is able to work, and you have an environment that a very strong, popular, successful President Dilma Rousseff can say, no, now let's deal now with the past. Because you have to be in a political position to be able to do and to bring the people with you. It's not for lack of people believing in the merits of this. Is that the political reality is not there. Actually, the clamor that exists in Brazil today is about corruption. Just in the past 48 hours, a member of the Supreme Court in Brazil announced that the mensalão was the corruption case that almost undid Lula's government. It's the statute of limitation will resolve that. The 38 members of Congress that were indicted by the federal prosecutor in Brazil will not be judged in a sense because there is a statute of limitation. That is it. Just yesterday, the same Supreme Court voted to allow Jader Barbalho, former governor, senator-elect from the state of Pará, absolutely accused of all kinds of corruption, we all know, and he was forbidden from taking office as senator by a law that was a result of public action, the Clean Record Law. And yesterday, the Supreme Court allowed him to, yes, sir, you can go ahead and become a senator in Brazil. The question of impunity, there is this one, really, you can mobilize people around. This case, corruption. We keep, President Rousseff already fired 7 ministers, 6 or 7 for corruption. That's which actually is part of her appeal, her popularity, because having corruption in Brazil is nothing new. What's new is having a president that responds to it, that reacts to it. And that's why she is perceived as, respected because she's dealing with this situation. But I think on the Araguaia case, unfortunately, I don't see, and that's why I quoted Nilmário Miranda, who was a human rights minister, is a man completely committed to this, wants to reverse the amnesty law, said until we have public clamor, public mobilization, nothing is going to happen regardless of what happens in Washington. Really, almost regardless. Obviously, it does not prevent you and others working in cooperation with Brazilians that want to help to produce those documents, to release those documents. That's a very
and that
good
creates
work.
pressure in turn.
Yes.
And actually, I mean, I would point out that Argentina at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, had an absolutely rock-solid amnesty law that nobody questioned. And, less
And
than
then-
10 years later, it was gone.
Because the
And we now have
political
hundreds.
circumstances.
Right, so I'm saying none of these things are set in stone. And I do think that the political work that we had to do and the building up of the jurisprudence is a really important part of the pressure that continues to push until the political moment is right.
Uruguay is probably a really good comparison because Uruguay is a case where you had an amnesty law that was actually passed, by a Democratic Congress, approved in a referendum in 1989, and it stood for 25 years. And there were all kinds of pressures and efforts to get it overturned, and then the government resisted, and the government was, there was the 2 left-wing governments in power that were resisting, until finally, 2 months ago, they ultimately overturned the law. But it was partly because of the international court's ruling, but it was also because there was ongoing civil society mobilization trying to get the government to respond to that. And it seems to me that's the factor that's, I don't know that it's missing, but it's not nearly as strong in the Brazilian case. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Oh, wait, there are other questions.
Just
Yeah,
one,
just
just
one
one
sentence
sentence about something I heard in the process of getting information for this conversation. I was told by people that work at the Supreme Court, say, a lot of Brazilian military, young military in Brazil, probably don't feel comfortable with this stuff. They have nothing to do with this. The commander of the army in Brazil was 23 years old, was a second lieutenant when the military took power in '64. Now, if you assume that, as I assume, that Brazil will continue to modernize, that Brazil will continue to be present in the world, that Brazil will modernize its armed forces, there may be a moment when internally in the armed forces people say, what is the problem
What are we
here?
protecting here?
What are we protecting? This is damaging our reputation. And I think that will be the political moment also. So, it's not a matter of there's nothing to be done, but this will require much more work, and mostly in Brazil, internally.
My question is sort of dovetails with this, and that's about the interpretation of the amnesty as protecting agents who've committed torture. Because if you talk to the people that were involved in the amnesty movement, which is an important moment in civil society, and exiles are supposed to come back, it's considered that connected crimes always been intended to allow for those people who have gone underground or gone into exile, who have committed crimes that on the surface didn't qualify as political crimes, but were connected to those political crimes, to be amnestied, and it was never intended to protect torturers. So my question is really, why is the interpretation that there was a compromise made in '79 that included torturers, and their argument that that was never the case, why has that never gained any traction?
Because it's unreal. Their argument is unreal. The only reason the military left power in a sure, what is it? Lenta, gradual e segura, slow, gradual, and sure, okay, was that they would not be prosecuted. One of the things that people have to keep in mind, I think it's different from other countries. In Brazil, the number of people that disappeared are different, but in the low hundreds. It's not in the high thousands, right? As in other countries. The military took power in Brazil, and they stayed there for 21 years. And they tortured a total, I think the number of people tortured in Brazil is in the low thousands. It's 2,000 and plus. The reason that happened, they were able to organize the transition, which is common, because they were supported. There was lots of support for the military in Brazil, and the support ended because of an economic crisis, was the oil shocks. And that's where, and they organized the exit. They took power as an institution and they left it. And I think this part of, and the people that were involved in the negotiations knew that, you would not bring them to justice. That was the spirit of this thing. Well, you can later say that was not exactly it. To those people, I would say, keep saying it and keep creating the environment. One day you may create jurisprudence that you say, okay, this is not it, and maybe even with the support of a new military that will emerge in a democratic Brazil, etc. But I am not hopeful for just one reason. We are not being able to prosecute thieves that are there, that are being elected by the same people. And it's obvious what they are doing, and we are not able to, we expel them, they lose their political position, okay, their posts, but they do not pay criminally for what they did. So once we do this, I will become more hopeful. I think we will eventually do this, because if we are going to build a modern economy in Brazil, it's absolutely incompatible with the levels of corruption we have. So, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I want to bring the archive side of it in. The International Council on Archives right now has out for comment a document on access to archives that is trying to put a floor under access principles in all kinds of archives in all countries, whether it is a business archives, whether it is an NGO archives, government archives. The 6th of the 10 principles talks precisely about human rights, and that even if records are closed for other reasons, that they are accessible for human rights purposes. It tracks the language of the Joanne principles. It is very important to get voices like those in this room to put in positive comments, because this will be voted on, I think, unless it all blows up, but it's supposed to be voted on next August in an international meeting, and the voting will be the national archivists from countries plus archival associations. And unless we got support for this, that particular principle is very controversial. You can imagine this is tough for national archivists to vote for. And so we very much need comments from these organizations saying these principles are important. That's one.
Could you send Mola the link?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would like to know the name of the institution under which this.
And that way
We can circulate it to everybody, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
The second thing I'd say is, as you probably know, in June, the High Commission on Human Rights decided to appoint a rapporteur for the next 3 years to look at the principles of impunity and how they're playing out. And that, of course, has a lot of archival issues within it. And it would seem to me that all these groups, as soon as that rapporteur is appointed, I'm told it's probably around the 1st of March. The application period is closed and they're now sorting this out. It would be very important to sit down with that rapporteur and talk about the impunity issues in these countries in the region.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I think we had one other comment here, and then we should probably wrap up. We have a little informal reception, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I'm Brazilian.
Oi.
No, it's because you were saying, you were talking about the OAS and how it doesn't like have any impact or doesn't like reach out to the Brazilian society. But like complementing what you said, I guess what happened with our law of domestic violence, which was approved because of a ruling from the OAS. The work that happened after that in the media and in the society about the role of the OAS made really, made the courts more important to the Brazilian society, and that was a moment when the Brazilian society really realized how important the court was. So it's not impossible. I mean, it's all a matter of political will and the civil society getting together and organizing themselves.
Are you referring to the Maria da Penha
Yes,
case?
exactly.
What date was that? 2000 and it's early.
I don't remember.
It's early. It's 2000 and what?
2006, I guess.
No. It's much earlier than that. It's earlier than that.
Yeah, but anyway,
I
it
want
was,
to say something
yeah.
about it.
So another thing is that I had a friend who worked at the Amnesty Commission. It's a commission that they take they work with the victims of the torture and the dictatorship, and they work with grading the amount of money they should receive from the state because of the state responsibility. And she was telling me the offenders are all dead, So if you have a concern about like really prosecuting those people, it has to be done like right now, because people are really, it won't make sense anymore in some years, to have a law allowing for those people to be prosecuted because they won't be alive anymore.
Right.
And another thing that I'm really aware also of the debate of the dictatorship within the military, within the army, and it's pretty rough. Like I feel like some years from now, some years ago, the whole discourse became much more strong and much more like the civil society is trying to get us, so kind of like the army kind of closing itself. So I really feel that this should be a very big issue in the future, because like my brother is in the academy now, and I sometimes try to talk to him about the dictatorship and telling him how terrible it was and how many people were there and blah blah blah, and he gets really angry about it, and so his friends, because it, people are really talking about that and really convincing those young students that it happened for a reason, like the whole dictatorship happened for a reason, and the society supported it in the beginning, and so there is no reason for those people to be prosecuted right now, and so this will be a very great issue in the future, because I see the tensions getting really, really high in the side of the civil society, like demanding for that to happen, the prosecutions to happen, the families to be compensated, and on the other side, the military, pushing, no, this cannot pass, this law cannot pass. We have to be strong. We have to get together as a group and really, so.
Can I
Yeah.
just comment one? Your brother is what academia? Agulhas Negras?
Negras.
Yeah, the West Point, the
Yeah,
Army
West Point
Academy. Now, he will be, his fear about, what happened before, etc. This is contemplated in the Truth Commission, believe it or not. Because the Truth Commission is not about 64 to 85. It's about 46 to 85. This is a way to dilute from the start. You know, because why do you have a military regime? Because some civilian guys messed up so badly the military have to come and save the nation. Lots of Brazilians believed that at the time. That's why the military assumed power without firing a single shot. Popular support, okay? And sometimes when you see the actions of some Brazilian politicians today involving corruption, you almost wonder. See the context, the political context again. You talk the case of Maria da Penha. Is a lady that was abused by her husband in the state of Pará, I think was north. And there was a decision, it was internalized. The political context is different. Because it involved also violence against children. There is one crime that you will get you to jail in Brazil is violence against children. This gets you, or not paying the whatever, you get divorced or you don't pay there what you have to pay. That takes you to jail. Almost all the time. That gives you jail time. Now, this is, I believe, pre-Lula time. What has happened, and this is what the other case that I mentioned on Belo Monte is important, because the orientation, here's where it gets complicated. Latin America, even the concept, okay, is internalized in Brazil by the left. No, most Brazilians don't know where it is, don't feel part of it. We are Brazilians, we are not Latin Americans, okay? If there are Brazilians here, I always tell my students at GW, do this. Next time you meet a Brazilian, ask, are you a Latin American? And the answer will be either an immediate no, I'm Brazilian, or a very long silence. Because I have to think, okay? So, but the left in Brazil, because of the struggles of the 50s and 60s and 70s, is the one that brought this. The left in Brazil took power, and the more declared left took power. Cardoso comes from the left. Lula represents the left. I think none of them are really left, but they are social democrats. But the OAS became a subject in Brazilian government, in Brazilian diplomacy. The OAS, starting with the Lula government, is considered a relic of the Cold War. And the guidance that the people representing Brazil at the OAS had is that it's a nice observation post, so observe, but prevent by all means anything that we may consider against our national interest. And that's where the decision on the Belo Monte is problematic, because it created a reaction in Brazil. And this is the same Dilma Rousseff that is absolutely committed to human rights. Because this was and is and will be an energy project, have no doubt about it. Belo Monte will be built on time, maybe ahead of schedule. Actually, the first of the three power plants in the Amazon, the Santo Antonio in the Madeira River, is ahead of schedule. There was a question of indigenous rights, because some indigenous will be displaced. And in my modest evaluation, and I reviewed this, I think that the Commission probably made a huge political mistake by the order, or the whatever they call, is to order Brazil to stop construction of a power plant in Brazil that is in Brazilian territory, built with Brazilian money by Brazilians, to respond to what the Brazilian elected government decides is an energy need. This is approved by Congress. This is discussed for 8 years. And suddenly there is a decision by the Human Rights Commission and the Inter-American, the American Organization of American States, to stop construction. The response was visceral. That's why Brazil, to this day, happened in April. To this day, Brazil does not have a sitting ambassador at the OAS. Brazil withdrew its candidate to replace Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro at the Commission. He would be replaced now, end of December. And Brazil although this will not be admitted publicly, I think, but it was reported in the media, Brazil has suspended payment to the OAS, doing the exact same thing that we like to criticize the United States when it does in the UNESCO because of the Palestine situation. And now, and Brazil has started openly a process proposed at the OAS meeting in San Salvador, the reform of the Commission. But this is, again, political context, because you have an administration in Brazil that is very suspicious about anything that relates to the OAS, this relic of the Cold War. And you have all kinds of activities around it trying to build alternative schemes. This is all part of the same, either if this is going to happen or not happen, I don't know, but this is the context. That's why it's so important to keep those things in mind. And and move ahead and believe in what you believe and fight for it, because the political context may change, and those actions that are being taken now may help do that precisely.
I feel a need, because it's 5:30, to wrap up, and I hate to do that on a note where Michael, I'm sure, and lots of other people have comments and thoughts about kind of a related but whole new controversy and subject of debate. But just to come back for a second, I mean, sort of where we started was to talk about the Araguaia case and what it means for access to records in Brazil, in the similar issues in Peru, and similar issues throughout the hemisphere. And while I think there are debates about the OAS and the jurisdictional questions, and while everybody emphasized distinct political realities in every country that ultimately are going to determine whether amnesties move forward, all of that, at the same time, I think through whatever vehicles, there's an emerging regional consensus, as Kate said, about access to records, and that's going to be in debate over the next year. And I just want to end by saying that I think Kate proposed some, and we had another suggestion as well, about follow-up discussion on how to move some of this forward, and I hope maybe sometime in early January maybe we could try and organize a serious sort of planning meeting to talk through some of that stuff and think about what we might do. So I'll end on that note and thank all of our speakers.
All right.